Well, we're glad you're here. Thankful for this occasion that brings us together. Grateful for the songs that we have sung, the lessons in those songs that have been selected. Appreciate fellows serving the supper, the prayers that have been offered today. Grateful for all of that, and grateful to God above all things for this privilege we have. Before I get into the lesson this morning, let me make mention of something quickly, if I might. We do have scheduled on the fourth Sunday night after service, we usually have the young folks get together and we have a class. And don't know about all the logistics yet of that, but planning on having that somewhere sometime this coming week, or next week I should say. And I'd like for the young folks to do this in preparation. I'd like for you to select a song that has a special meaning to you out of our book, and put some thought into that and bring a song. And we would like to spend some time thinking about the power of lessons in song. And we'll talk about that more as a topic, Lord willing, in that effort. So pick a song that has special meaning to you and bring that, and we'll talk about the lessons that it teaches. Okay. They tell me today's Father's Day. I used to never notice things like that, especially never mention them in my lessons. But I thought, the way things are going morally in our country, before they outlaw the idea of having a father, maybe we ought to mention something about it. Mother's Day, things of that nature. I heard a fellow one time make this point. He said, one thing that bothers me, he was talking about, hearing lessons on Father's Day. He said, I've noticed this. He said, on Mother's Day, if a sermon is offered connected with that, it's always a sermon about how wonderful women are and how important they are. And he said, if the preacher ever mentions Father's Day, it's a lesson about how fathers ought to do better. He said, I don't think that's fair. And, he's probably right about that. And so let me correct that, on my part at least, by saying how much I do appreciate the fathers here. And I'm grateful to God for the father that I had. And I think the good women in this audience and young folks here would be wise enough to realize that though there are no perfect fathers except the Heavenly Father, there's a good bit of good to remember and to appreciate. Men seem to love praise, run on praise, especially from their wives and their families. There is a time to sit back and say, hey, thanks. Thanks for the work you put in. Thanks for the good you do and try to do. And so I think that's a worthy thing. But I want to also add to that, that good fathers don't just happen by accident. And that I believe that there is a place for instruction, not only about recognizing good fathers, but finding good fathers. That is, building a house, a home, in which there's going to be the right kind of person in the top of that hierarchy as God sets it up. There are a lot of bad choices that happen in life. There are a lot of disasters that happen because maybe we're not wise in the choice we make, young women make of finding someone who has the high character. And there are times when women choose a person who will ultimately make their life harder and more difficult. And yet there's also a great blessing in finding the right kind of person. So what I thought I'd do today in reference to finding the right kind of father is to go back to a story in the Old Testament that we're all familiar with, in the book of Ruth, and to think about the very wise choice that Ruth made of a husband and father and how that had such a great impact, not only on her life, but on, in some sense, all of us, as we think about Boaz as a godly husband. I toyed with the idea of just reading the book of Ruth. It would take about 10 minutes, but our time is pretty short as it is, so I'm just going to go on the assumption that this audience is well familiar with the story of Ruth. It's the story of a family of Bethlehem who in the days of the judges and the days of famine, some have thought maybe this was the time of Gideon. You remember when Gideon was raised up by God, Israel was being oppressed by the Midianites who would come and raid their crops and leave them without enough to eat. Maybe that's so, I'm not sure exactly when. But at some point, famine, this family, this Bethlehem family, identified as Elimelech and Naomi and their sons Mahlon and Chilion, left Bethlehem, left Israel, and went down to Moab and stayed there for a time where things were more stable. And we find that it was a disastrous time, that 10 years they spent down there. During that time, the father died. The sons married Moabite women, and they both died. And now this woman, Naomi, who went down there with a family, finds herself seemingly alone with these two foreign daughter-in-laws. She hears that things have gotten better in Israel and there's nothing really for her in Moab, and so she determines to go back, and she tells her daughters-in-law, you might as well stay here because I certainly can't be any help to you anymore. And one of them does, and the other, of course, Ruth, says, no, don't entreat me to leave you or forsake you. I'm going where you're going. Your God is my God, and nothing but death is going to part us. So she goes with her mother-in-law and is a great help to her. When they get back, the bitterness of Naomi is obvious. She is a woman who is shell-shocked by the loss that she's felt. But her daughter-in-law is there to be a sustainer for her. We find how that she helped her just to find something to eat. Here they are, strangers in their own land, and they wind up finding a field in which Ruth can glean for her mother-in-law and for herself. You remember the process of gleaning in the Old Testament? It was a law. It was a part of a rule that if you were blessed to have a field and have a crop in that field, you were not to reap every last piece of the fruit of that crop. Leave some of it for the poor. Folks that don't have what you have, that they might be able to go and find the leftovers and to be able to sustain themselves. Somebody in that shape, when they're gleaning fields in order to eat from day to day and finding enough food just to go from one day to the next, they're not exactly on the Forbes list of richest folks. These are people who are just barely sustaining. And that's where our folks are. That's where Naomi and Ruth are. But it just so happened that the field that she went to glean in was owned by a guy named Boaz, who turned out not only to be a great man, but to be a near kinsman of her family. And so that was significant. And when they found that out, of course, Naomi was excited about that, and she felt the presence of God in this. The story winds up that they desire to marry, that is, Ruth and Boaz fall for each other and desire to marry. But there's another factor, and that is that actually, under the law of Moses, there was another that had, because of his closeness to the family of Naomi, had the right by the law of Moses to redeem the estate of this fallen son and to marry Ruth. But as it works out, it's too much of a price for him to pay. And so their desires are fulfilled, and the law is fulfilled, and they marry. And as you read in the book of Ruth, at the end of the book there, that they are blessed with a son. 4:13 reads that Boaz took Ruth, and she was his wife. And by the way, I'll admit to you that really most of the story is taken up with them meeting and marrying. We don't know a lot about their married life, but we do, I think, have a hint from what we know about these two people to know this relationship. That he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bare a son. And as you continue reading there, we find out how that Boaz, the last two verses of Ruth tells us, Boaz begat Obed, and Obed begat Jesse, and Jesse begat David. So it's a famous family. And this part of this link in the chain, I think, is very instructive. Because this good family did not come together by accident. I think there were good decisions that were made, and I think likewise spiritual choices made, and the providence of God was to be seen. In the first place, I want you to notice that when Ruth fell for Boaz, it had a lot to do with the fact that he was a God-fearing man. You turn back to the book of Ruth in the 2nd chapter, and in verse 4, his character is displayed in this little note that says that Boaz came from Bethlehem, and he said to the reapers, "The Lord be with you." And they answered him, "The Lord bless thee." Just this little note has always been powerful because it says something about how this man was a person in whom the Lord lived. And I've always thought, if you want to really know a man's character, you may not find it if you just see him sitting in a pew somewhere on Sunday. But if you really want to know a man's character, go where he works. Or talk to the people that work for him and ask them about what kind of fellow he is. And then you'll find out. I don't think Judd minded me telling this. I probably told it before about Judd, when he had a trucking business, he used to work for an outfit or under a larger umbrella company. And one of the things that you noticed when you went to visit them is they had religious music playing in the background. There were crosses here and there. They'd talk about Jesus and so on. But when you dealt with them, you found out that really they were pretty cutthroat people who wouldn't always treat you fairly. There was a man that used to work for them that Judd knew. He was not a member of the church, wasn't a religious fellow. But I remember a quote from him. He was talking about that particular company, and he told Judd one time, he said, I know maybe it's just an old, how do you put it, an old beer-drinking Polak. He said, but I'll tell you one thing, I know those guys are as phony as a $3 bill. Well, I'll let the Lord be the judge of all of that. But I'll say this, that, when you work with a fellow, you get to know who he is. I think it's one of the great compliments to Boaz, is that the people that work for him thought of him as being a genuinely godly man. And I know that's something that would appeal to a woman like Ruth. She was looking for a man in whom God really lived. In New Testament terms, if you turn with me over to the book of Ephesians, the 4th chapter, what we're talking about is the very thing that Paul is writing about here. In Ephesians 4 and in verse 22, Paul writes about the Corinthians, or about the Ephesians, I should say. He says, you must put off concerning the former conversation the old man, which is corrupt according to deceitful lust, and be renewed in the spirit of your mind, and put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness. Wherefore put away lying, and speak every man truth with his neighbor, for we are members one of another. Be ye angry, and sin not. Let not the sun go down on your wrath, neither give place to the devil. Let him that stole steal no more, but rather let him labor, working with his hands the thing which is good, that he may have to give to him that needs. Let no corrupt communication proceed out of your mouth, but that which is good to the use of edifying, that he may minister grace to the hearers. The point is that you see the new man in an individual, not by how loud he sings on Sunday morning, but by how honest he is, how pure his speech is, how generous he is to other people. in a fellow like Boaz, God truly lived. And if you as young, let me speak to the young women here, if you make it your priority to find a young man or an older man, as the case might be here, these were not kids, were they? Ruth and Boaz weren't. But if you're looking for a partner in life, find someone in whom God truly lives. And be wise enough to look not just at how they deal with you when you're with them in some special circumstance, but how other people see them, and how the reputation they have and the way they deal with other people. It makes a lot of difference. Take something else about Boaz that would be good to find in any man. If we're looking for a potential husband and father, capable as a provider, maybe that sounds rather prosaic, but in the second chapter of Ruth, Naomi had a kinsman of her husband's, a mighty man of wealth, and a family of Elimelech. His name was Boaz. He was a mighty man of wealth. I don't know how he got his money. I'm not sure if he made all that money from scratch or if he inherited money. I know this, he seems to be able to handle it. That's more than you can say for some people, however he got it. Over in Luke chapter 15, we read there a famous story about a young man of a wealthy father who's known forever as the prodigal, the wasteful son. And verse 13 says that the son took his inheritance while his father yet lived, at his demand, and took a journey into a far country and wasted his substance with riotous living. And when he had spent all, he found himself at the lowest point. There's a lot to be said for a fellow, whether he has the ingenuity to make money or whether he simply has the ability to manage it. There's something to be said for a fellow who is able to hold money, keep money, and provide. It is a part of the picture. 1 Timothy chapter 5 and verse 8, if any will not provide for his own household, he's denied the faith and is worse than an infidel. I'm not telling you here you need to find the richest fellow in town to marry. That's not the point. But the point is, if you're looking to find someone to be a companion, he needs to be responsible. And Boaz certainly was not foolish when it came to material things. It's no fun to support a deadbeat. He might be cute, and you might think, well, he's funny. But if he's so foolish that he can't handle his own business, he's going to make your life a long, hard one. Just a fact. And so if we're looking one day to celebrate Father's Day in a happy family, then let it be your ambition to find the right kind of man. A God-fearing man, a man who is responsible with material things. Let me mention something else about Boaz that I think made Ruth's life much better. His character shows in how he was kind even to the lowly. I mentioned a moment ago in the second chapter of Ruth in verse 10. At one point, when it becomes obvious that Boaz has singled Ruth out for kindness, that she's a stranger, here she is, a foreigner, gleaning in his field, and he's the owner. There's a big jump between those two positions. But he shows her great kindness and carefulness. And in verse 10, at one point she falls on her face and she bows herself to the ground, and she said to him, why have I found grace in thy sight that thou shouldest take knowledge of me, seeing that I am a stranger? It's an important test, I think, of a person's character. You notice this as you think about maybe spending time with a young man or becoming more interested in a young man. You see how he treats people who might be in a position to serve him or who might be in some way not as advantaged as he is. I think about a lesson the Lord taught along this line in Luke the 14th chapter. How important is it to have this kind of consideration for those who might depend on them or those who might in some way be less fortunate than they are? In Luke the 14th chapter and verse 12, the Lord, while he was at a dinner as an invited guest, taught this lesson. He said, when thou makest a dinner or a supper, call not thy friends, nor thy brethren, neither thy kinsmen nor thy rich neighbors, lest they also bid thee again, and recompense be made thee. But when thou makest a feast, call the poor, and the maimed, and the lame, and the blind, and thou shalt be blessed, for they cannot recompense thee. Thou shalt be recompensed at the resurrection of the just. We see the lesson? The Lord says there are plenty of folks in this world who are willing to give if they get. But a godly man is the kind of fellow who gives with the idea that he's not going to get anything in this life, but he knows that God will reward. And so you have someone who is kind to the lowly because God has taught him to be merciful to those who need mercy. And God, who gives mercy, will reward in the last day. That's the kind of fellow you're looking for. You're looking for the kind of fellow who does not judge people based on their finances. Go back to Ruth just a moment. Let me go back to the 2nd chapter. Let me go to verse 8. Boaz said to Ruth, he said, hearest thou not, my daughter? Won't you listen to me? Go not to glean in another field, neither go from hence, but abide here fast by my maidens. And let thine eyes be on the field that they do reap, and go thou after them. Have I not charged the young men that they will not touch thee? And when thou art athirst, go into the vessel and drink of that which the young men have drawn. And that's when, as we just read, she falls on her face and says, why are you treating me with such kindness? And he did. That's the point we made a minute ago. But I want you to notice why he did. Boaz answered, verse 11, and said, because it had been fully showed me all that thou hast done unto thy mother-in-law since the death of thine husband, and how thou hast left thy father and thy mother and the land of thy nativity, and art come unto a people which thou knewest not heretofore. I'll tell you why Ruth was so special to Boaz. She may have been pretty, but I'll tell you this, knowing Boaz, if she'd been a different character, that would not have helped. That would not have made the difference. What he admired about her was not how much money she had in her pockets. What he admired about her was that she was a woman of quality, devoted to God, devoted to her family, a godly individual. And I tell you, boy, we need that spirit in young people. If you want to make a good decision, learn the principle. This is not given in reference to marriage. That's not the context in 2 Corinthians 5. But the principle here sure does apply in every walk of life. Wherefore henceforth, Paul writes, know we no man after the flesh. Yea, though we have known Christ after the flesh, yet now henceforth know we him no more. What does that mean? When Paul writes that we used to know Christ after the flesh, but not anymore, I think what it means is that you can see some things through the eyes of the flesh, through a carnal attitude, but if you ever take on a spiritual mind, everything looks different. The world looks different. Your life looks different. People look different. To that point, look in Matthew 13. In Matthew 13 and verse 53, Jesus had taught these astonishing lessons, the parables. And verse 54 says that he came to his own country. I think he's talking about Nazareth there, where he had spent so much time, where he'd grown up. And he taught them in their synagogue, insomuch as they were astonished, and they said, whence hath this man this wisdom and these mighty works? Is this not the carpenter's son? And is not his mother called Mary, and his brethren James and Joseph and Simon and Judas, and his sisters? Are they not all with us? Whence then hath this man all these things? And they were offended in him. But the Lord said, a prophet is not without honor. A prophet is not without honor, save in his own house, in his own country, And he did not many mighty works there because of their unbelief. That's what it means, isn't it? To see through the flesh. When they looked at Jesus, they saw, this is the guy who grew up here. We know his family. We know where he's from. But Paul said, we don't see Jesus that way anymore. We see him in his true light, not through these circumstances. Being able to see the worth of people in a spiritual mind changes everything. Look in James, the 2nd chapter. You know, one of the things that James taught was this lesson. He said, my brethren, have not the faith of our Lord Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, with respect to persons, judging literally by the face, looking at things superficially and carnally. And he gives this example. He says, if there come unto your assembly a man with a gold ring and goodly apparel, and there come in also a poor man in vile raiment, and ye have respect to him that weareth the gay clothing, and say unto him, oh, sit thou there in a good place, and say to the poor, stand thou there, or sit here under my footstool. Are you not then partial in yourselves, and become judges with evil thoughts? Hearken, my beloved brethren. Hath not God chosen the poor of this world, rich in faith, heirs of the kingdom which he hath promised to them that love him? You seeing those folks like God does? God sees those as heirs of the kingdom. And you see them just like trash, to be blunt. Like folks to be despised. What's wrong with this picture? Do not they, talk about the rich, blaspheme? Now let's start back in verse 6. Ye have despised the poor. Do rich men not oppress you and draw you before the judgment seat? Do not they blaspheme that worthy name by which ye are called? Yeah, but they got money. Look how expensive that cloak is. Look at those shoes. That's not what you judge. That's how you see people. Let me apply that to the lesson here. Don't be too overwhelmed by things, by a nice car, about how somebody dresses, or some toys that they have. Don't choose superficially. You know that. If you want a happy Father's Day one of these days, if God wills, then you've got to think about things spiritually. And that point is a point well made. I think it was a lesson that Ruth certainly knew. Let me tell you one other thing about this man Boaz that's impressive to us. If you go back to the story in Ruth, we alluded to this a moment ago just in that brief summary. But by the time Ruth and Boaz realized that they were willing to marry and that they wanted that match together, Boaz gave this caveat. He said in verse 12 of chapter 3, he said, now it is true that I am a near kinsman. Howbeit, there is a kinsman nearer than I. Tarry this night, and it shall be in the morning that if he will perform unto thee the part of the kinsman well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the part of the kinsman, then I will do the part of the kinsman to thee. As the Lord lives, lie down until the morning. Here's the lesson that we draw from that. I believe that Boaz, by this point in time, had fallen in love with Ruth. He desired very much to be her husband, to be her in the law, in the language of the law, her Gael, her redeemer, to raise up seed to the fallen husband, to do the will of God in this matter. But there was another that was closer to the matter that legally had the standing. Now think about that. Should that make any difference? I mean, if you love somebody, if you really have the strong feeling, doesn't that just mitigate every other circumstance? That's the way people talk today. As long as you love, nothing else matters. It doesn't matter if the person you love maybe is married at that very moment to somebody else. Or maybe they've been married several times and they've not followed the law of God. The Lord said if you marry a person like that, it's adultery. But I mean, we love them. find someone who loves you but loves God's law even more. Now that person will be honest. They'll be people of integrity. They're not going to let you down. There are folks who think it's so romantic and so wonderful that you know when you watch these movies that people put out, I'm not a big movie guy, but so many stories on television, these made-up dramas, are all working to try to get people to think that feelings matter over everything else. Have you noticed that? That here's the episode where the two people, they don't have a right to each other. In fact, they may be married to somebody else, but they really love each other. And so the story wants you to root for these two people just to leave their other responsibilities and get together because this is love. Yeah, that's the devil talking. But you know, when it comes to Boaz, he loved Ruth, but he loved God and his law even more. That'd make a great husband, by the way, somebody like that. Let me mention in closing, you know, if you, as a young woman, want a Boaz to marry and spend your life with and make your life with, here's a great piece of advice. Be a Ruth. That's also critically important, because she had the high character. Boaz said about her, everybody in town knows you are a virtuous woman. It wasn't just appearance, that she had a genuinely high standard. And so, because she had that kind of character, she was able to attract someone of that kind of character. Keep your standards high when you're looking for someone to be your marriage partner. And by the way, for that matter, keep your standards high in dating. I'm not the first one to make this point. We've made it before, but I'll say it again. When I hear young people say, well, I'm going out with so-and-so, but I'd never marry them. Famous last words. You know, you're not going to marry everybody you date, maybe. Some do. Some have one person they date and marry, but maybe that's not the norm, and maybe you will date several people, but don't ever lower your standards to date someone that is not of the character to be associated with, and someone that you would not even consider to spend your life with. There's no point in it. It's dangerous, and it really leads to problems. But here's the idea. If you want a high-quality mate, be high quality yourself. Second place, I think something else that we could say about Ruth was that she was a follower of Jehovah by choice, that she was devoted to her mother-in-law, that she was not destroyed by the losses that she felt as she went through some hard times in her life. She was hardworking. She had that kind of character. And so that was attractive to Boaz. But thirdly, let me make this point last of all. Tell you something else that Ruth did in her life decisions is that she left room for the providence of God. This is pointed out a few times, but let me look at the 4th chapter of Ruth and verse 14. The women, looking at what had happened here with Ruth and Naomi and their struggles, and then the marriage to Boaz, and then the child that's born, the women said unto Naomi, Blessed be the Lord, which hath not left thee this day without a kinsman, that his name might be famous in Israel. Think about how blessed they were by God in this story. This is the story of Ruth, is the story of the providence of God. Sometimes you meet young people and they are starting their life out and they wonder, where will this person come from that I will spend the rest of my life with? I'd like to one day be married, but, where do you find such a person? Well, I don't want to discourage you from doing your part. I think it's good to put yourself in peer groups where there are quality people. There are various ways in which parents work to try to get their children associated with other good people who love God and have the same kind of goals in life. I think that's extraordinarily important. I don't mock or diminish that a little bit. Wise parents recognize the need for that. It always gives me a little pause. I appreciate men, for example, who say, I want to go and I want to preach the gospel into the reaches of the universe here, and I want to go off someplace out in the middle of the woods and tell them about Jesus. Glory. But if you've got young people who are looking one day to marry, you've got to think about their future as well. Make decisions that are good for the whole of the family. And it's not a sin to think about your family and save your family while you're trying to save the world. But anyway, the point is that when you've done what you can do, trust God's providence. I think God hears and answers prayer. And I believe that Ruth is an encouragement to that end. When we've done what we can do, we've done the right thing. I think the Lord will remember us and He will bless us. Okay, appreciate your kind attention this morning to the lesson. Please get out the songbooks and turn to the number that Joel has selected. Let me encourage you to give your life to God, to put Him first, to make it your ambition to please Him in everything that you do, and trust Him that He will not let you down as you make good decisions in life. Starts out with confessing your faith that Jesus is the Son of God. It starts out with being baptized into Christ and raised to walk in newness of life. Is that your desire this morning? If you're here as one who's a child of God, if you've not been faithful to that commitment that you made, then make it right with Him by all means. And if we can help you in some way, let us know, please, right now while we